Late at night, a notification suddenly came to the young man's phone. A young man named Chen Yun was looking at his phone and crying loudly because of a broken heart, continuing to look at his phone. Chen Yun winced, looking at the message of his ex-girlfriend, who firmly suggested that he break up. After watering a few tears, Chen Yun began to type a message at a very fast speed, asking his ex-girlfriend Tong Tong about what happened. Chen Yun then asked if Tong Tong and his roommates had decided to play truth or dare. Chen Yun in the message begged Tong Tong not to do this because the young man's feelings for this girl named Tong Tong are more than serious. After sending the tortured sticker, Chen Yun began to ask his ex-girlfriend what he had done wrong and was he not good enough. Then Chen Yun began to write a message saying that he had already planned their future. Chen Yun's next message was that they would have a wonderful family in the form of 2 beautiful children, a car and a house. Chen Yun assured Tong Tong that the young man would make every effort to bring this to life. Chen Yun roared loudly, dripping with snot and tears, but continued to type. With the last message, Chen Yun asked Tong Tong that it was really because he couldn't buy Tong Tong a handbag. After that, Chen Yun said that he was saving money, so he would be able to buy a purse for Tong Tong next month when the scholarship came. However, this message has not been sent. Instead, Chen Yun received a system notification that Tong Tong had restricted the number of people who could send her messages. It was also reported that as soon as Tong Tong accepts Chen Yun's request as a friend, they will be able to communicate. Seeing this, Chen Yun howled that life is pain. Immediately, an excited roommate came up and loudly said that Brother Yun seemed to be out of sorts today, covered in drops of cold sweat. That young man smiled faintly and asked Chen Yun for forgiveness for disturbing him. Suddenly, Chen Yun slammed his fist hard on the table and dropping his chair out of anger and frustration, left the dorm room, slamming the door loudly. Chen Yun's surprised roommates continued to stare at the door. One of them asked the other about whether Chen Yun had been abandoned again, to which the second firmly replied that this was the 6th time this month. Chen Yun's roommates were discussing the young man, and one of them even called Chen Yun a stickler in the common people. Another agreed, adding that Chen Yun had been chasing Shu Tong for 3 years. After some time, Chen Yun and Shu Tong met. Shu Tong told Chen Yun not to do that, because people are watching, to which the excited Chen Yun nervously smiled and turned to Shu Tong, telling her that he understands that Shu Tong is angry, but Chen Yun bought her favorite. Chen Yun begged Shu Tong not to talk about the breakup anymore. Chen Yun noticed that if Shu Tong doesn't like something about him, then the girl can always say, and Chen Yun will change. At this time, 2 girls standing nearby were discussing what one of them had heard about Chen Yun working for jobs at once so that he could afford to give gifts to Shu Tong. Another girl asked what the result was in the end, because Shu Tong left Chen Yun anyway. Shu Tong turned to Chen Yun and said that she was not angry with him. Then, with a cautious tone in her voice, Shu Tong announced that her ex-boyfriend wanted to get back together with her. Shu Tong explained that after much thought, she came to the conclusion that she really needed that guy more. Chen Yun frowned, and Shu Tong can loudly ask Shu Tong about that former young man, calling him by his first name Wang Junkai. Then Chen Yun began to ask about, but how? Chen Yun stopped in mid-sentence and reminded Shu Tong that this Wang Junkai is still a bad person. Chen Yun asked Shu Tong if she had forgotten how this Wang Junkai had deceived her. Chen Yun, continuing to shout loudly. At this time, a Mercedes drove up, in which a smug Wang Junkai was sitting, telling Shu Tong to jump into the car. After opening the car door, Shu Tong turned to Chen Yun and said that it was better for them not to meet again, as her boyfriend might misunderstand. After these words, the car immediately left. Chen Yun, on the other hand, stood in place and watched the car with a sad look. After a certain period of time, Chen Yun stood in the order to himself why no one appreciates sincerity. And is Chen Yun so worthless that he can only suck up to everyone? Chen Yun abruptly squeezed the plastic water bottle, privately deciding that there was nothing wrong with being courteous. Chen Yun's eyes lit up with a bright red light, and the young man himself grinned, confidently deciding for himself that it was only necessary to do it properly and then Chen Yun would become not a sick often, but a Casanova. Suddenly, Chen Yun heard a tinkling notification sound, and then froze when he saw a yellow system plate in front of him. On this plate, there was a message that the strongest system of the stickler had identified a passing candidate for the role of host. The next system plate notified the young man that the connection was successfully completed. Also, suddenly, a system plate appeared above Chen Yun's head with information about himself, which included his name, personal funds in the form of 230 yen, as well as the fact that the young man does not have any reinforcements in the account of the stickler system in the amount of 90 quadrillion yuan. After reading all this information, Chen Yun froze in shock, wondering if the clingy system was some kind of hack. Chen Yun was interested in what this system allows you to do. When Chen Yun saw the chest through the yellow translucent plate, he immediately pulled his hand towards it. However, a woman's scream was suddenly heard. The girl called Chen Yun a pervert and asked about what he sees at all. what he does. Summing up, the girl screamed, telling Chen Yun to watch his hands. Chen Yun froze in horror and blushed, covered with drops of cold sweat. The disgruntled girl folded her hands in front of her and asked Chen Yun about what he had been staring at from the very beginning. Then she said that Chen Yun was definitely not right in the head. Chen Yun carefully looked at this disgruntled girl and saw a system plate next to her, on which there was information that her name was Zilul, age is 21, height is 165 centimeters, weight is 49 kilograms. It was also written there that the attractiveness index of Zilul is 7 whole and 9/10 points, and the disposition towards the owner is -50 points. Chen Yun froze, looking at this system plate in surprise. However, a second later, the young man saw another sign explaining that as soon as the location parameter reaches 96 points, it will be possible to make a counterattack, and Zilul will become a fan of the owner Chen Yun. Chen Yun looked at this system plate in shock, asking himself a lot of questions, among which was how to use this system. About what? That is, Chen Yun needs to as much as 90 quadrillion yen on his account of the stickler system. Immediately after that, a system plate with the image of a black bank card appeared in front of my eyes, where the text was an explanation that all this amount is on that card, but only women can use it. It was also written there that when the user of the card becomes a fan of the owner, 1/10 of the amount spent will be credited to the owner's personal account and can be used at his request. In addition, the host can receive other rewards. Chen Yun sighed, realizing now, this is how things are. Chen Yun decided that then he could use this girl named Zilul as a test mouse. Chen Yun smiled slightly, but then abruptly changed his expression to a kinder one and spread his hands to the sides, addressing Zilul as a beautiful lady and asking her not to be angry. Chen Yun also noticed that whatever Zilul wanted, today everything is at Chen Yun's expense. Immediately after these words, a notification appeared in front of Chen Yun's eyes that the implementation of the stickler system had been successfully completed. Zilul, on the other hand, looked at the young man without expressing any emotions at all. Another notification appeared in front of Chen Yun's eyes with the task that was Zilul's counterattack. It was also written there that the reward for completing this task is 10% of system funds and 5 game points. In addition, there was an explanation on the plate about the reinforcement points that can be used by the host to improve their characteristics. For example, physical characteristics, spiritual state, strength, agility, and so on. Suddenly, Zilul arched an eyebrow and grinned, starting to inundate Chen Yun with questions about how he tends to be rich, just wants to show off in front of Zilul, and what the young man can really do. People around, at this time, looked at Zilul, remembering that she is the first beauty of the Faculty of Arts. These people also said that they had heard that Zilul was quite adept at spending other people's money, because somehow Zilul only needed a couple of words for a man to spend 30,000 yuan on her. The people around concluded that this Chen Yun seemed to have problems. Chen Yun, at this time, grinned and told Zilul not to rush into words, because isn't true that if she doesn't try, she won't know. Zilul smiled broadly and held out her phone with a QR code saying that today was such a good day. And then this girl asked the young man about why not treat all the classmates with sweets in the buffet. Zilul thought to herself that Chen Yun was dressed like a beggar, but trying to show off in front of a beauty. Zilul privately decided that she would show Chen Yun what a real shame. However, at the same second, a notification came to Zilul's phone that there was a receipt to the Olopia account in the amount of 50,000 yuan. Zilul froze in complete shock. The people around froze in shock and immediately whispered that Chen Yun just took and transferred 50,000 yuan as if it didn't cost anything. Another person whispered that this young man looks as unremarkable as possible. And now it turns out that Chen Yun is actually a major. Chen Yun smiled and told Zilul in a completely calm voice that 50,000 was not so much. Zilul remained silent, trying to move away from the shock. Chen Yun, on the other hand, handed over his phone with a QR code and breaking into a wide smile, asked Zilul if this was enough to get her WeChat. Zilul blushed with surprise, wondering to herself that she had really made a mistake, and this young man was really a major. Zilul smiled slightly and decided that if so, Zilul immediately moved closer to Chen Yun's phone with a smile on her face, told the young man that he could not worry since Zilul thinks that WeChat can be added. Chen Yun's mouth dropped open in surprise. Zilul moved almost close to the excited young man and said in a flirtatious voice that Chen Yun would go to the same place with Zilul first. But cunning Zilul thought to herself that she was interested in seeing how long Chen Yun would last. Approaching the luxury store called GUGOI, Zilul said in a firm voice that she would like to clarify something first. Ben Zilul reported that she was not a mercantile girl at all, but just wanted to understand how sincere and serious Chen Yun was towards Zilul. Chen Yun, listening to Zilul, grinned and silently provoked the girl to spend money since the more Zilul spends, the more he will get back. Chen Yun then told Zilul in a completely calm voice that there was no problem. After entering the store, Chen Yun looked at all sorts of different bags. Suddenly, the young man heard a familiar voice asking Huang Yunkai if this bag suits her. Turning around, Chen Yun wondered in shock that it was Zudong. At that moment, Zudong turned her head to the side and looked at Chen Yun in surprise. Chen Yun froze in surprise, looking at his ex-girlfriend named Zudong. However, a pleased Zulul suddenly appeared, who immediately asked Chen Yun that Zudong was his ex-girlfriend. Immediately after that, Zulul gasped, saying that she thought she was at the wrong time. Chen Yun opened his mouth in surprise for a second, and then smiled slightly and said that no, on the contrary, it was very timely. Zulul approached an employee of this store and immediately asked about whether they had a handbag from the spring show on sale. The shop worker smiled and said that the last one was left. However, the employee pointed her hand in the direction of Zudong and reported that another client is now trying on this handbag. Zudong cast a displeased glance in the direction of Chen Yun, thinking to herself that the young man still wouldn't leave her alone. Then Zudong decided that now she would show Chen Yun that a loser like him is not a rival to Brother Yunkai. Coming out of her thoughts, Zudong smiled sweetly and called Brother Yunkai, informing him that Zudong's birthday was coming soon. Zudong smiled sweetly and began to loom that same person in front of Huang Yunkai's eyes, distracted from the screen of his phone. Huang Yunkai asked about his birthday with a slight dissatisfaction, and then reminded Zudong that she had recently celebrated, to which Zudong pouted her lips and announced that it was a birthday according to the lunar calendar, but it should be soon according to the solar calendar. Hearing this, Huang Yunkai slightly furrowed his eyebrows and then smiled irritably and asked Zudong to listen to him carefully. Then Huang Yunkai reminded Zudong that she knows that a young man does not like mercantile girls, smiling even more irritably. Huang Yunkai asked Zudong about whether it was not that the girl was with the young man not only for money. Zudong froze in horror, covered with drops of cold sweat. However, at the same moment, Zulul appeared, who snatched the same purse from Zudong's hands. Zulul apologized, saying that if they didn't buy, Zulul would take her for himself. Shen Yuan, meanwhile, received a system notification that he had received plus 20 points to Zulul's favor with the young man, and when Zhen Yuan paid for Zulul's purse, he immediately received another notification that he had received another plus 20 points to Zulul's favor with him. Zulul giggled happily, clutching her brand new handbag to herself. Shen Yuan got another plus 20 points, holding that black card in his hand. Zhen Yuan smiled slightly, thinking to himself that this is what it is. The true power of money. It's just some bag, and Zhen Yuan already has 60 points. The young man suggested then at this rate, a couple more bags, and they will achieve the desired result. Slightly knitting his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose, Zhen Yuan chuckled, believing that the cashback could, of course, be bigger. At this time, the shop workers were looking at the upset and embittered Zudong, discussing the situation in a whisper. One of the workers turned to another, calling her sister Zilai, and told her that she did not understand why people who look like they were born with gold and spoon in their mouth are so stingy towards their women, and those who look unremarkable are willing to spend such sums. To which Sister Zilai said that the store's director had told the workers many times that it was not necessary to be biased against guests, since appearance was deceptive. At this time, Zulul glanced at the irritated Zudong and chuckled, saying that both the bag and the guy were taken by a better owner. Glancing at Zhen Yuan, who was looking at one of the display cases with bags, Zulul broke into a sly smile, privately deciding that such a big fish should not be missed. Immediately after that, Zulul made her sweetest expression and grabbed Zhen Yuan by the hand, calling him dear, thanked him for the bag, admiring that Zhen Yuan is so generous. Zhen Yuan froze in surprise. Zudong, at this time, could not stand it. With tears in her eyes, looked viciously in the direction of her former young man. After just a moment, Zudong walked up to Zhen Yuan and abruptly shoved him in the chest, shouting that this was too much. Zhen Yuan cast a sly glance at Zudong and smiled slightly, laughing inwardly at Zudong's words that it was too much. Zudong, Zhen Yuan silently addressed your Lin Zudong, telling her that they had just started, when Lin Zudong began to run away from the store with tears in her eyes, and Huang Junkai ran after her. Zhen Yuan received a system notification that a second object had been found. Immediately after that, Zhen Yuan received detailed information from the system about the second object, namely Lin Zudong herself. The last system plate informed Zhen Yuan that as soon as the location parameter reached 96 points, it would be possible to make a counter-attack, and Lin Zudong would become a fan of Zhen Yuan's master. In addition, the young man will receive a reward for performing this maneuver in the form of 10% of the system's bank and 20 gain points. Suddenly, Zulul moved closer to Chen Yuan and asked the young man in a sly voice if he was having a little fun. Immediately after that, Zulul announced that she was not averse to playing along, and then smiled slightly and confidently announced that they would, of course, go to spend money. Chen Yuan's eyes turned into a golden yuan symbol when the young man asked Zulul that, would one purse be enough for her? After some time, Chen Yuan and Zulul arrived at another store. Chen Yuan pointed his index finger indiscriminately at various departments with things Zulul liked. In the end, grinning, Chen Yuan handed over his bank card and said that apart from these two outfits, Everything else should also be wrapped. A worker with clothes in her hands froze and opened her mouth in shock. And Zulu looked in love at how the young man was paying for her purchases that even her eyes turned into hearts. The employee smiled, turning to Mr. Chen Yuan, informed that they would pack everything and deliver the selected items to the address indicated by them. Listening to this, Zulu, holding a bunch of packages in her hands, continued to exude a loving aura, thinking to herself that men with money are so attractive. Chen Yuan, at this time, received a notification from the system that he had received plus 5 points of Zulu's affection for him. Zulu and Chen Yuan then followed to the perfume shop. After Chen Yuan paid for Zulu's choice with his card, he received a notification again that Chen Yuan received plus 5 Zulu's favorability points. Immediately after that, Zulu and Chen Yuan went to the cosmetic store. After a couple of moments, when Chen Yuan paid for the purchase again, he received plus 5 points of Zulu's favorability. A few moments later, Chen Yuan and Zulu were back in the clothing store, and when Chen Yuan put the bank card to the terminal again, he received plus 5 points. After a certain period of time, a blushing Zulu, aside from fatigue and smiling broadly, said that she thought that was enough. Catching her breath, Zulu told Chen Yuan that if they continue to buy like this, Zulu is afraid that all this will not fit into her apartment. Chen Yuan, hearing this, immediately reached into the phone and told Zulu without emotion that this was not a problem, and Chen Yuan would buy Zulu's apartment. While Chen Yuan was counting something on a calculator in his phone, adding up quite large amounts, Zulu froze in horror. Frightened by such a statement, covered with drops of cold sweat, Zulu became nervous and said in a trembling, uncertain voice that it was somehow not good, because Chen Yuan had already spent so much money and this was only their first meeting. Zulu smiled nervously and said that she just wanted to make a joke. At the same second, Chen Yuan received a notification from the system that Zulu's disposition had dropped by minus 5 points. Chen Yuan rubbed his chin thoughtfully, privately concluding that the young man seemed to have scared Zulu. After thinking a little, Chen Yuan made another conclusion indeed. If he was told that they would buy Chen Yuan a house worth several million yuan, then the young man would also experience some inconvenience. Suddenly, Chen Yuan moved closer to Zulu and smiled, saying her name, and that Zulu was studying in the 3rd year of the Art Institute. Then Chen Yuan reported that Zulu is 21 years old. Her height is 165 centimeters, and her weight is 49 kilograms. Summing up, Chen Yuan asked Zulu a question about whether he would behave so recklessly if the young man did not like all this. Then Chen Yuan abruptly turned the employee and asked if they had a participant savings card in the store. Chen Yuan then firmly replied that he would top up this card with 500,000 yuan. Summing up, Chen Yuan pointed his palm at Zulu and told the employee the next time this girl, meaning Zulu, comes to their store, recommend the best to her. The employee immediately agreed and politely asked the customers to wait a little. Chen Yuan, at this time, turned to Zulu and said in a confident voice that this savings card was for her in order to smooth out the impression after an unsuccessful joke about buying an apartment, which scared Zulu. Hearing this, Zulu instantly melted and blushed deeply. Chen Yuan moved closer to Zulu's ear and whispered the words that if Zulu was uncomfortable, then the girl could offer Chen Yuan something interesting in return. Zulu blushed even more and abruptly pushed Chen Yuan's face away with her hand, calling him a pervert. However, no matter what Zulu said, Chen Yuan received a system notification that Zulu's affection for him had increased by plus 30 points. Seeing all this, the shop workers admired Chen Yuan so much that even their eyes turned into hearts. The workers whispered loudly enough that this guy, Chen Yuan, was so plain in appearance, but so rich. Moreover, the workers noticed that Chen Yuan is not just rich, but also very generous, because the young man cares so much about his woman. Hearing all this whispering, Chen Yuan broke into a sly smile, thinking to himself that if you have money, no matter who you are, and no matter how you behave, they will forgive you and let you get away with it. Suddenly, Zulu made a cute expression and said Chen Yuan had bought her so many gifts, and then asked about why the young man should not think about himself, to which Chen Yuan spread his hands to the sides and briefly replied that there was no money. Zulu smiled slightly and said that then it was her turn to give a gift to Chen Yuan. Zulu thought to herself that if she wants to catch this big fish for a long time, then she should invest herself. After some time, Zulu and Chen Yuan were already in another clothing store. Zulu chose completely different clothes, choosing the right one for Chen Yuan. After choosing the right beautiful clothes, Zulu took the young man to the barber shop, where Chen Yuan was neatly trimmed by the barber, following Zulu's every instruction. After some time, Chen Yuan came out of the fitting room, completely transformed. Seeing the young man, Zulu was clearly pleased, as Chen Yuan received a system notification that Zulu's affection for him had increased by plus 5 points. Chen Yuan blushed slightly and got into a model pose, asking Zulu about how she liked his outfit, and whether this bow seemed a little strange. Zulu was silent, admiring such an attractive young man. Shen Yuan thought to himself that he was already an adult, but this was the first time he had encountered something like this. Shen Yuan concluded that Chen Yuan did not have to spend money on it. Zulu ran her index finger along Chen Yuan's chin and pierced the blushing young man with a flirtatious look, saying that there was nothing strange about this. Breaking into a flirtatious smile, Zulu blew Chen Yuan a kiss and happily informed him that she was so happy today. Zulu then thanked brother Chen Yuan, informing him that for a moment Zulu even thought that she had fallen in love. When Zulu and Chen Yuan said goodbye and went home, the young man received a system notification that Zulu's affection for him had reached 68 points. When Chen Yuan entered his dorm room, he loudly informed his roommates that he was back. Hearing Chen Yuan's voice, his roommates froze in shock and opened their mouths. One of these roommates shouted loudly, calling on his god. Then he turned to brother Chen Yuan and asked about what the young man had been doing all day and what he was wearing. Chen Yuan, without taking his eyes off his phone, with a slight smile on his face, announced that he had been on a date with Zulu. That young man put his hand to the side with displeasure and said with a questioning intonation that Chen Yuan had not decided anything with Lin Zudong, but had already taken up Zulu. Pressing his glasses to the bridge of his nose, the second roommate reminded Chen Yuan that Zulu is the first beauty in the Faculty of Arts, addressing the old man Chen Yuan. The young man clarified about what would happen to Chen Yuan if he was abandoned again. Suddenly, another roommate put his hand on Chen Yuan's shoulder and with a smirk on his face, said, "Listen to the brothers who say that this girl is not affordable for Chen Yuan." The young man was covered with drops of cold sweat and smiled weakly, saying words of gratitude to his roommates for their advice. After some time, Chen Yuan was looking at his phone at messages from Lin Zudong, who wrote that if Chen Yuan really hates Lin Zudong so much, then they should just delete each other from friends. Chen Yuan grinned as he looked at Lin Zudong's messages and concluded that, fortunately, these manipulations of Lin Zudong no longer work. However, if they remove each other from friends, then Chen Yuan will not be able to earn extra money on Lin Zudong. Coming out of these reflections, Chen Yuan sent Lin Zudong a question about whether he hated her. Chen Yuan reminded Lin Zudong that she also knows that she is special to Chen Yuan, to which Lin Zudong sent Chen Yuan a message saying that she was with Huang Zhengkai not because Lin Zudong needed his money, but because Lin Zudong's mother was ill and the girl needed 50,000 yuan for treatment. After seeing Lin Zudong's message at the same second, Chen Yuan transferred 50,000 yuan to the girl's account. Seeing this, Lin Zudong screamed in shock and surprised at the entire dormitory, not believing her eyes. With a strange arch of her eyebrows, Lin Zudong informed her roommates that she barely mentioned it and Chen Yuan immediately transferred the money. Hearing this, a surprised roommate came up to Lin Zudong and asked about who this rich man was, who was spreading out such money. That neighbor clarified that it was really Huang Zhengkai. Lin Zudong immediately furrowed her brows and said that to hell with Huang Zhengkai because he couldn't even buy a simple bag for Lin Zudong. Then Lin Zudong said in an irritated voice that it was Chen Yuan who transferred the money to her. The surprised roommate opened her mouth and asked about Chen Yuan, clarifying that Lin Zudong had just broken up with him. The roommate froze, continuing to wonder that such a poor bastard as Chen Yuan really has. Lin Zudong furrowed her eyebrows and immediately began tapping her fingers on her smartphone, thinking that, really, it was her mistake. Lin Zudong decided that she needed to ask directly. Chen Yuan, at the same time, received a system notification that Lin Zudong's affection for him had increased by +5 points. Lin Zudong began to flood Chen Yuan with her messages. Lin Zudong asked Chen Yuan what all this meant. Then Lin Zudong began to ask Chen Yuan about the young man got so much money because today in the store. Lin Zudong immediately broke off and abruptly asked her ex-boyfriend in a message about their relationship with Zulu. And then the girl clarified whether Chen Yuan had bought Zulu's bag. After sending a surprised smiley face, Lin Zudong asked Chen Yuan one last question about whether Chen Yuan was really born with a golden spoon in his mouth after being silent for a while. Since Chen Yuan did not respond, Lin Zudong continued to write plaintive messages about wanting fried pork. After that, Lin Zudong sadly asked the young man that he didn't love her anymore. Pursing her lips, Lin Zudong continued to write to Chen Yuan without stopping. However, as soon as Chen Yuan saw as many as 15 unread messages, the young man immediately clicked on the chat settings and selected a button called Do Not Disturb. With a slight dissatisfaction, Chen Yuan looked away, thinking that Lin Zudong was too talkative, but Zulu was not so hasty in this regard. Chen Yuan then turned back to his mobile phone, wondering where else he could spend a lot of money on a woman. After seeing the application icon with the image of a shark, Chen Yuan abruptly realized that he could try with live broadcasts. Having entered this program, Chen Yuan got on the air to a beautiful girl named Xiamir, who with her sweet voice reported that she would be online for only an hour, so the fan brothers should hurry up with gifts. Chen Yuan entered the broadcast room under the nickname Lone Wolf and immediately began to read the comments, where many fans complimented Xiamir. One of the commentators, with the nickname Mind, reported that his wife found out that he was watching Xiaomir's streams, and now they are getting divorced. Looking at his mobile phone, Chen Yuan grinned, thinking to himself that more than $1 million is much more than a bag. Chen Yuan then selected a rocket from the many gifts and sent it to Xiamir. The girl folded the heart gesture from her hands and thanked the lone wolf for the rocket. Xiamir said words of love to the lone wolf, and then froze in shock and bulged her eyes. With her mouth slightly open, Xiamir continued to stand and watch as a whole 100 missiles were sent to her. After seeing 100 missiles, those same commentators and Xiamir herself froze in shock, realizing that these 100 missiles are equal to a whole 1 million. Human. A few moments later, the commentators began to write to the stream chat again. A commentator with the nickname Airplane wrote that Chen Yuan had spent a lot of money. That same Mind swore and said that they had a rich man here, and then he apologized and said that he was mistaken. Then a commentator with the nickname Charming appeared, who turned to Sugar Daddy and asked him to punish him. The last one was the same Kakara, who wrote that he was also nothing like that, so Chen Yuan could also pay him. Kakara asked Chen Yuan to write him something. Continuing to read Xiamir's stream chat, the young man concluded that these commentators are really snobs. Chen Yuan then smiled slightly and asked Xiamir to let him please her a little more. Immediately after that, Chen Yuan began to poke his finger at the missiles again, choosing them in the amount of as many as 900 pieces. 1 moment later, Xiamir received a notification that the lone wolf had pleased her with a rocket. Immediately after that, Xiamir's entire screen was filled with those very missiles. A few moments later, an employee of the stream's office abruptly burst into his boss's office and shouted loudly that the incredible had happened, bursting inside. That employee shouted to his boss the information that some unknown rich man had just unbuckled mere as much as 10 million yuan. Hearing this, that boss even spat out all the water he was drinking out of shock. Then this man made a serious expression on his face and asked the employee if he was a fraudster. To himself, this boss wondered in surprise that once as many as 10 million yuan is it really money laundering. At this time, in the streamer's restroom, 3 girls were discussing something very loudly. One of these streamer girls blushed, shouting to the rest of her friends to go to her soon. Then this girl began to loudly inform the others that the idea of the young man was a lone wolf. The streamer clarified that this is the richest one, so all these girls should write to him soon. The other girls also blushed a lot from excitement. Another one of them started shouting that a lone wolf had transferred 10 million yuan to Xiamir. Another girl said that a couple of such missiles would cover their monthly salary. Chen Yuan, at this time, was looking at his phone, seeing a bunch of friend requests from different girls. Xiamir froze, covering her mouth with her hands. Xiamir wondered to herself if this was a dream, and if she really had been paid 10 million yuan. Immediately after that, Xiamir pinched her cheek hard and concluded that she felt pain. Suddenly, Xiamir heard a rustling sound. Turning to the side, Xiamir saw one of the workers with a sign in his hands, on which it was written that their boss said that it was necessary to take a lone wolf into circulation. There was also a red note on the sign that the boss was giving Xiamir an extra 10%. Seeing this, Xiamir chuckled to herself and smiled slightly, thinking to herself that she did not need to say this, because it was as if Xiamir herself would have given such a large fish to others. Immediately after that, Xiamir's face changed dramatically and winked at the camera, saying a big thank you to the lone wolf. Xiamir smiled sweetly and told Lone Wolf to send her a message, and she would thank Chen Yuan properly. A few moments later, Chen Yuan received a personal message from Xiamir herself, who addressed him as a brother and asked if he was here. With the next message, Xiamir announced that her broadcast would last another 5 minutes. Not waiting for the young man's reply, Xiamir sent a message again, but with a polite request to answer it. However, Chen Yuan himself was already sound asleep at that time. The next day, some university students were looking at hot news, among which in the first place in the top was a story about a mysterious rich man who spent 10 million in a shark. It was also written there that the identity of this rich man still remains a mystery. Students shouted to the others that others would rather look at the fact that someone had spent 10 million in a shark yesterday. The same roommate with glasses for vision blurred from his dreams that so much money had been spent. This roommate of Chen Yuan said that in his city it would be money. The roommate sighed admiringly, thinking that if only he had so much money. Chen Yuan opened his eyes, hearing all this conversation, and sighed. Another roommate, at this time, said that he hopes that today he will have a dream in which this young man will be the richest man. After some time, Chen Yuan was brushing his teeth and thinking hard about the fact that yesterday he spent so much money, and the system did not connect with Suyu Amir. Chen Yuan continued to stare thoughtfully at the system plates with information about the related representatives of the fair, among whom there were only Zuil and Lin Xiaodong. Poking at the shark app icon, Chen Yuan wondered if this really required a personal meeting. and that is, all the young man's money was wasted. Chen Yuan entered the list of dialogues and gasped in shock when he saw a lot of unread messages from different girls. One of them said, "Hello," calling Chen Yuan a brother, and then reported that she was a cute little girl. After that, she asked if Chen Yuan would like to meet. The next girl introduced herself as Lang Yang and said that she was glad to meet. Seeing all this, Chen Yuan was covered in drops of cold sweat from shock due to how many personal messages were sent in. At this time, Chen Yuan's roommates were about to leave somewhere. One of them gasped with joy, saying that he was looking forward to it. The roommate with glasses began to hurry his friends, as all the good places will be sorted out. Upon hearing this, Chen Yuan turned around and called out to his roommates, asking them what they were doing and why they didn't invite Chen Yuan with them. The roommate turned around and informed them that, of course, they were going to class. Then that young man with a serious expression said that today is an open lesson, and these young people want to enjoy the beauty of Sayo Yuki. Adjusting his glasses, the second roommate began to talk about how Chen Yuan had run ahead of them before and did not want to leave after the lesson. The third roommate asked Chen Yuan about whether he was coming or not. Chen Yuan froze for a few moments, remembering Sayo Yuki's appearance. After a certain period of time, the young people came to an open lesson and looked at the same girl named Sayo Yuki. Sayo Yuki is the chairman of the Hunan University Student Union, and also the dream of all guys. In addition, Sayo Yuki plays the piano, is the chairman of the ballet troupe, and has a second class in fencing. It is the incredible appearance and many talents that make Sayo Yuki an elusive dream of all guys. Chen Yuan was thinking to himself that a Hunan University beauty named Sayo Yuki has been keeping to herself all this time, and no one has managed to conquer this Everest in 3 years of study. At this time, the girls who were sitting behind Chen Yuan were whispering very loudly. The first girl in love asked about who this handsome young man was, to which the second girl in asked the question that Chen Yuan had transferred from another group, since this girl had not seen this handsome man before. Listening to all this, Chen Yuan grinned and kept thinking that since Sayo Yuki is so unapproachable, this is a great opportunity to get a good cash back. Lin Shutong and his roommate were also sitting behind. This roommate gasped, wondering aloud that it was Lai Chen Yuan and how he had changed so much in these couple of days. The last question that roommate had already asked Lin Shutong herself, asking her if Chen Yuan had dressed up so much in order to impress Lin Shutong herself. Lin Shutong froze in surprise, but then blushed and smiled shyly, agreeing with her roommate's words with uncertainty in her voice. Then it confused Lin Shutong reported that she also has Wang Junkai, and the girl is so worried that Wang Junkai and Chen Yuan will quarrel. Chen Yuan, at this time, received several system notifications that Lin Shutong's affection for him had increased by plus 10 points. Taking a glance back, Chen Yuan chuckled with displeasure, concluding that the young man had only to dress up, and Lin Shutong's attitude towards him improved. Chen Yuan believed that Lin Shutong was really a shallow woman. Chen Yuan then glanced at the system's nameplate, wondering to himself what, in any case, how he could add Sayo Yuki to the system. Suddenly, Chen Yuan heard a loud shout from one of the young men, who offered the other to show everyone how he would conquer the beautiful Sayo Yuki. Chen Yuan immediately froze in surprise. Watching those young people, one of them leveled off and, with a grin on his face, told him to look carefully at the fact that now Sayo Yuki would fall in love with him completely and irrevocably. His friends, meanwhile, were happily provoking him, calling him boss and telling him to go ahead. This young man immediately approached Sayo Yuki and called her baby in a flirtatious voice, asking her to share her WeChat. Watching all this, Chen Yuan cursed with displeasure about the fact that the one that Chen Yuan had noticed was being taken away right before his eyes. Sayo Yuki froze in surprise. That young man grinned and began to move closer and closer to Sayo Yuki. However, suddenly that young man was called by an irritated girl who was sitting next to Sayo Yuki and asked about what that guy was doing. That young man completely ignored Sayo Yuki's girlfriend and continued to flirt with the girl, telling Sayo Yuki that they would get to know each other a little and start dating. And that young man did not have time to finish, as Sayo Yuki's exasperated girlfriend grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and pulled him in her direction, armed with a sharp pencil. That girl, whose name is Wu Xiaofei, and who is Sayo Yuki's roommate, looked at that young man very irritably and calling him a brat, asked about what he had done to himself. Making an even more vicious face, Wu Xiaofei firmly told Sayo Yuki not to touch them. That young man was covered with drops of cold sweat, horror, and casting a nervous glance at the sharp pencil in Xiaofei's hand began to say in a trembling voice that this was a misunderstanding, and that young man just wanted to join the student union. Also, that young man in a nervous voice reminded Xiaofei that Sayo Yuki is the chairman, and this guy just wanted to ask for advice. Getting even more nervous, that young man said that Wu Xiaofei had misunderstood everything. However, a second later that young man was already wounded by that sharp pencil and howled in pain, arching her eyebrows in anger. Wu Xiaofei said in an angry voice that she didn't think so. Wu Xiaofei also noticed that this was some kind of stupid excuse to pick up a girl. Wu Xiaofei then told that guy to get out of here, after finishing with that young man. An irritated Wu Xiaofei test and said that it was even funny, citing as an example that it was like a toad flaunting in front of a swan.